Unemployed and angry. A university graduate blows herself up in Tunisia, sending shockwaves across the country. I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is the birthplace of the Arab Spring. In 2010, a Tunisian street vendor set himself alight. Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation sparked a revolution across the Arab world. In Tunisia, thousands took to the streets. They demanded an end to corruption, high unemployment, and a failing economy. But what they wanted most was the end of more than 2 decades of authoritarian rule. On that count, they succeeded. President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was ousted. Tunisia was hailed as the first success of the Arab Spring. But 7 years on, unemployment is still high. The economy is struggling. Terror attacks are rare, but they've damaged the country's tourism industry. And last week, in a shock development, an unemployed university graduate blew herself up in the capital. So how far has Tunisia really progressed since the revolution? Natalie Pahonen reports.
Menach Hebla's family can't understand what happened to their daughter. The 30-year-old died and injured 17 people when she set off a bomb in the main avenue of Tunis in October.
I had just returned home and I got a phone call from the police. They asked me, "Where is Mana?" I asked them why, what has happened to her. He told me we heard some bad news concerning her.
Mana was an unemployed university graduate. She'd been out of work for 3 years. She was not on the radar of the authorities. Tunisia's interior minister says the bombing was an isolated act. It was the first attack in the capital in almost 3 years. The country has been under a state of emergency ever since. While evidence of this latest incident has been cleared away, it's rattled the government.
إن شاء الله على كل حال المسؤولين في تونس ينكبوا على أسبابه ومسبباته ما ناخذوش كان الأمور الظاهرة. يعني هو كونه موجه للدولة للسلطة لهيبة الدولة.
It's been almost 8 years since a Tunisian street vendor, Mohamed Bouazizi, set himself on fire to protest poor economic conditions. The mass demonstrations that followed turned into a political revolution and paved the way for the Arab Spring. Tunisia was hailed as a democratic success story for the region. But for many people, the change they rallied for, and what Bouazizi died for, hasn't come. The economy has been stagnant and the country has relied on foreign financial aid, including from the International Monetary Fund, to stay afloat. It's meant the adoption of higher taxes as ordinary Tunisians pay for that bailout. It's estimated about 1/3 of young people don't have jobs. Various parties have campaigned with the promise to improve the country's financial situation. But successive cabinets, including the current one led by Prime Minister Youssef Chahed from the secularist Nida Tunis party, have failed to deliver economic change. This was his message in 2017.
In the period to come, this government will be the equivalent of a war government, tasked with fighting against terrorism, against corruption, for growth, against unemployment and regional inequalities.
This week, Chahed reshuffled his cabinet, hoping new ministers will kickstart the economy ahead of next year's elections. But will Tunisians see enough change to have faith that politicians can deliver a transition in which all citizens prosper? Natalie Pahonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, first, let's speak to journalist Matthew Castle. He was an eyewitness to the suicide bombing in Tunis last week. Matthew, welcome to the program. Just describe what happened, where you were, what you saw last week for us.
Right, so I was in central Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, and on Avenue Habib Bourguiba, where there was a demonstration by friends and relatives of a young man who was killed by the police a few days or a week earlier. And shortly after that demonstration ended, my colleague and I, we were off to the side, just fixing our equipment and getting ready to keep filming. About 15 minutes after that, there was a loud explosion, less than 100 meters away from us. And I first thought it was tear gas because there had been a demonstration, but the sound was a bit louder, and the smoke that followed was not the kind of smoke that you usually see from tear gas. And so we kind of looked over, we went over there and noticed that the police were clearing the scene. They had their weapons drawn, and we saw a woman's body lying on the ground. And we quickly learned that she had indeed detonated some kind of device and set off an explosion that killed her and injured, although from what I understand, quite lightly, injured a number of people who were in the area.
What sort of security was there during that demonstration? Who were the people demonstrating? Could they possibly have been targets, or would it be your impression that this was a random attack and it wasn't directed towards any particular group?
Right. I don't have, my colleagues and I and everyone who I talked to at the scene, no one seems to think that this bombing, the explosion, was in any way tied to the demonstration. The demonstration was mostly grieving family members who were understandably upset that they lost their relative. However, they were also calling for a peaceful demonstration. They wanted to avoid any kind of confrontation with the police. Avenue Ben Habib Bourguiba is always, it's the center, it's where the Interior Ministry is located, so there's usually a lot of police located on the street anyway. And it's likely that this woman was trying to target the police and had nothing to do with the demonstration, at least from what I understand.
Matthew, how often have you been to Tunis? How well do you know the country? How much time do you spend there? And when you're there, do you get any sort of idea of people living in fear of attacks like this? Because they're fairly rare in the past few years, but clearly there is a security issue across the whole of North Africa, really.
That's right. There is a security issue in the region, certainly, especially in neighboring countries like Libya. I've been to Tunisia a few times. I'm not based there, but I work regularly in the region. And Tunisia feels, I mean, since the Arab Spring, this was the country, after all, that set off a chain of events that would spread throughout the Arab world. Since the Arab Spring, Tunisia has been doing really well, all things considered. In 2015, there was a number of attacks that were claimed by the Islamic State. But since then, they haven't really had many, such incidents that have happened in Tunisia. And security-wise, it feels quite safe. Like, I traveled all across Tunisia now on this last trip, and I didn't really feel any security concerns. A couple observations that I did notice were, there is a kind of freedom that people have now that they didn't have, and certainly doesn't exist in other countries in the region, where people the police would stop us in the street, and Tunisian colleagues of mine would push back, would talk back to the police, would argue with them even. And that was a bit striking, not something I'm used to seeing. But something else I noticed was that there's a lot of frustration that still exists, especially among the youth. There's unemployment, especially when you go to areas outside of Tunis. And this woman's story, the bomber, and in no way to justify or condone what she did, but she comes from that same generation, that so-called revolution generation. She's 30 years old. She studied. She was educated. She had a master's, I believe, in English. And according to her family, she could not find any work or any opportunities in Tunisia. She didn't seem to have the ideological past that a lot of the other attackers in Tunisia have had. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of the country is doing generally pretty well, but it does still have its challenges. And hopefully this was an isolated incident. It seems like it was, and people's life has gone back to normal.
Matthew, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Matthew Castle speaking to us about being there on the scene of that suicide bombing in the Tunisian capital last week. Well, let's bring in the panel now, because we're joined from Tunis by Ahmed Bouazi. Ahmed is the co-founder of the opposition Reformer Current Party. In Middletown, Connecticut, in the United States, the Tunisian affairs analyst Mohammed Dia Hammami. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. I should ask you first of all, Ahmed, do you agree with the assessment of Matthew Castle there, that to him it seemed like a random attack?
Yes, and it's really very strange, and the way that the police did not declare anything about the event. We don't know any organization that claimed the bomb. And what is also is strange that it was not an explosive belt. It is maybe more a handbag filled with explosives, and it was not really very strong explosive because the body of the woman, there was only a big hole in the left side of her body, and all the other body was intact. And the number of injured people, they were 20, in fact, 15 policemen and 5 civilian, and nobody killed. So maybe the woman was a victim also of an organization that put the bomb in her bag, and she had to bring it somewhere, and then they telecommand it and make it explode when they want to do so, because she had all her papers on her and ID cards and everything. So she was not going to kill herself. So we don't know until now. We don't know. We are waiting for the police report on the judiciary.
Ahmed, you're speaking to us from Tunis. How worried are you generally about your security there?
In fact, no. I can say that we don't really worry. Because the attacks, first, they are limited in places, especially the mountains of the West Tunisia, and the problem of mines is really very dangerous for shepherds and people working in there. I mean, local people. This is really they had to care about themselves because they don't know where they put their foot. But in the cities, we don't have a real threat.
Mohammed Dia, if these assessments are correct, that the suicide bomber was not ideologically motivated, but the fact that she was a woman, the fact that she's a university graduate who is unemployed, does that speak more towards the social and economic problems that Tunisians are going through, and it's almost an act like Mohamed Bouazizi's burning himself alive? Sorry, if you don't mind, Ahmed, this is for Mohammed Dia.
Yeah. So, to be honest, it's difficult to assess if she was motivated by any ideology, because until now, it was not confirmed by any source. But what is striking is the social and economic background from where she comes, and from where large number of Tunisians who have been involved in such type of activities come from. So comparing her case to Mohamed Bouazizi is probably not the best comparison that we can make, but it raises necessarily the question of the relation between this kind of activities and the economic situation of the country. If last year, Admiral Akrud, the military advisor to President Qaid Sibsi, was here in the United States, and we've been asked the question about the motivations of these people. Is it about ideology or about something else? And he strongly emphasized on the importance of the economic condition that a large part of Tunisian society are facing, especially during the last years since the beginning of a large program of reform that unfortunately has been failed. And I think that the link can be made, but it's difficult to make the comparison with the case of Mohamed Bouazizi, like I said earlier.
Okay, gentlemen, let's listen to a clip that TRT World's Imran Garda, my colleague, He did an interview with the founder of Ennahda, Rashid Ghannouchi, here in Istanbul this time last year. And the question was about the revolution, the Jasmine Revolution that replaced Ben Ali's 24 years in power, and what that would do for the people of Tunisia and the aspirations that the people have of this newfound freedom, this democracy, and the economic changes they would hope would improve their lives. Let's listen to the clip.
I'm completely convinced that in 2011, the Arab world entered the era of democratic change. How long it takes for this change to come is different from place to place, according to the complexity of the situation, and also according to the ability of elites to reach a consensus among themselves instead of elimination, conflict and fighting.
So, Ahmed Bouazi, a new era of democracy in Tunisia, but what is it doing for the people? Because as Mohamed Dia has told us, there's an economic problem in the country and people are completely desperate.
Yes, there is a big political problem, and I can say even a political crisis. But the economical situation is also very bad, especially for young people, and the government since 2014, they didn't have any program or any project to get out the country from this crisis. The local currency is going down every day. The prices are going high also. We have a 7.5% inflation, and the euro is its value is 330 dinars, and everything in the unemployment is stable at 15.5%, which is very high, and it can reach 40% in some regions, and especially among young people, and especially among people with higher education. And so the situation, I mean, the people, they don't see any good future, economically speaking, especially. And I think about 70% of young people, their dream is only to get out of the country and to go especially to Europe or North America to find a good economical situation. And people who cannot go there, even with going on small ships in the Mediterranean Sea, they are demonstrating, they are trying to live with very brittle, I mean, very small trade. They are selling fruits, they are selling clothes and on the street.
Okay, Ahmed, if you don't mind, I want to bring Mohamed Dia in here and just pick up on a point that Ahmed's just made there. People going on boats to Italy especially. 5 months ago, more than 100 people drowned when a fishing boat sank. Most of them were Tunisians, and they weren't very well off. But even those people who are educated and you could say slightly richer than average, they're trying to leave. The Secretary General of the National Doctors Order says that 45% of newly qualified doctors left Tunisia last year. In 2012, that percentage of newly qualified doctors leaving the country was 9%. So what's the solution here, Mohamed Dia?
Good question. What's the solution? So definitely all the problems that you've been raising are existing, but the big question is that politicians couldn't answer it. What is the solution? So I think in order to answer this question, we should start by asking the question, what is the problem? From where does the problem come from? You mentioned earlier the depreciation of the currency, which is one of the biggest factors that led to this high inflation, exacerbated the disillusion among a large part of the Tunisian society. This is tightly related to the current program of the IMF that has been implemented since 2013. Now we are in 2018, 5 years of continuous depreciation of the local currency that led to the rise of prices of food and other goods that are imported. In order to be able to change the situation, there is a need to repoliticize the economic reform and bring them at the center of the political debate. Unfortunately, that's not the case currently. The debate around economic reforms has been absent for decades, not only for the last years. Under the regime of Ben Ali, there was no real debate, and that led to a structural marginalization of a large part of the country, especially in the interior region. So in order to move beyond this situation, we should find ways to solve this structural problem and avoid limiting ourselves to some monetary solutions that are usually suggested by international institutions. And like I said earlier, the program that has been implemented by the IMF is not only leading to the depreciation of the currency, but in addition to that, is constraining the political choices of the Tunisian government, the conditionalities that are imposed by international institutions, IMF and others, including World Bank and other European
we know about the IMF.
Reduces the margin of action of political parties.
Mohammed Dia, thank you, because we know, of course, about the IMF austerity measures and the way they affect ordinary people's lives. Just in about 30 seconds, if you don't mind, Ahmed, people don't trust politicians. They don't feel as if they're close to any political party. There was a survey done earlier this year by Afrobarometer. It said 81% of people don't feel any affiliation or loyalty to a party. 79% said that if there was an election tomorrow, they wouldn't vote for any party or they wouldn't know which party to vote for. You're a politician in opposition. What would you do for the people to help them? 30 seconds, if you don't mind.
We are trying our best to explain to them that they have to go and to vote, because if they don't vote, other people will vote for the worst to take the government. And in the last municipal election, people didn't go to vote. We had less than 30% going to vote in Tunis, the capital, where I am councillor in the municipality. We are the third party. People are going out far from the two parties in the power, the Nahda and the Nida, and they are trying in our party, At-Tayyar Demokrati, or something independent people, to try to get different people to govern the country.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for appearing with us on the Newsmakers. Thank you. Still to come on the programme, Bangladesh bars its biggest Islamic party from next month's elections. Is the decision justified? And after notorious mobster Whitey Bulger is killed in prison, we speak to a former mafia boss about life in the criminal underworld and how to stay alive once you're out. Bangladesh will head to the polls on December the 23rd and vote for a new parliament. But the country's biggest Islamic party will not be taking part. Jamaat-e-Islami has had its status as a political party stripped by the Election Commission after a 5-year-long court battle. The High Court ruled it failed to meet certain electoral conditions. Supporters say the decision is prejudiced and accuse the Electoral Commission of working for the ruling party, the Awami League. Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal, which was set up after the Awami League came to power, has found several Jamaat-e-Islami leaders guilty of historical war crimes. So what does this mean for democracy in Bangladesh? Let's discuss this with Abu Bakr Mollah, who's in London. He's the spokesman for the Jamaat-e-Islami party in Europe, in Malmo in Sweden. We have Tasneem Khalil. Tasneem is a Bangladeshi journalist. He's also an author, having written the book Jalad, Death Squads and State Terror in South Asia. But we should say, gentlemen, and also inform our viewers that we did have a representative from the Awami League who was going to join us, but they had to cancel the interview at the very last minute. But let's start with you, Abu Bakr, because this concerns your party. What's your understanding of the reason that Jamaat-e-Islami will not be standing in the elections next month?
It is not that Jamaat-Islami will not be standing. The fact is that the government is barring and stopping Jamaat-Islami from participating in the election. And government wants to weaken the opposition, as Jamaat is the key opposition political party. Government wants to weaken the democratic process in Bangladesh. Government wants to wipe out the opposition from the Bangladesh. That is why government has used the court. Government has used the election commission to weaken the Jamaat-Islami. Election Commission has since 1979 has not raised any issue against Jamaat-Islami that Jamaat constitution does not conform and comply with the Election Commission procedures and rules and the RPO. Suddenly, when Awami League has come to the power, they have used one of their ally to file a case, move a case to the court. And it was not the Election Commission who moved the petition to the court. It is an ally of Awami League who moved the petition to the court. And the High Court Division, being instructed by the government, as international community has said, in particular International Crisis Group, Human Rights Watch, and American State Department, that government is using the judicial system to punish and weaken the opposition. And government is using the court system, judicial system, for their own interest against the opposition. So as part of that game, government has used the court to give a verdict against Jamaat-Islami. Jamaat has been doing the politics in Bangladesh since 1979. As I said, Jamaat has took part in the democratic process, and there was not an issue. Jamaat believes in the sovereignty of God, and it is their religious belief. And Jamaat also believes in democratic values, and it does not contradict, and it does not conflict with each other, and it does not conflict with the constitution even.
Okay.
Suddenly, as I said...
Okay, if you don't mind, Abu Bakr, let's get a more independent analysis of it. Tasneem, would you agree with Abu Bakr that the government is using the courts to get its own way politically and not have Jamaat-Islami standing in the election?
Well, I cannot comment on that. It was a
Is it a possibility? Is it a possibility at least?
Well, of course. I mean, it is. I mean, what's happening in Bangladesh for the last few years, it is a possibility, but I cannot say what this is exactly what has happened. Jamaat is a party. I mean, it has a history with the election commission, actually. The gentleman from Jamaat's side, he maybe forgot that Jamaat was having difficulties in getting registration earlier under General Zia's regime also. And it happened that later Jamaat became a junior partner of BNP, General Zia Rahman's party. So Jamaat definitely has this history of, having difficult relationships with the election commission in Bangladesh. That's what we can see.
Do people in Bangladesh, obviously not supporters of Jamaat, but its opponents, not politicians, but the general population, is there a feeling amongst the general population that Jamaat poses a threat to Bangladesh, either socially or politically?
Well, Jamaat has a very violent history that dates back to even before the birth of Bangladesh. And Jamaat as a political party was opposed to the independence of the country. And politically, it was allied with the Pakistani military as it was engaged in a genocide in erstwhile East Pakistan at that time. So definitely there are lots of stigma attached to this party because of that history of 1971. That is number one. And then also Jamaat, post-independence, Jamaat has a violent history, especially with its student wing. The Chhatra Shibir has had a violent way of conducting its affairs. So definitely, among the general public in Bangladesh, Jamaat is not actually, very, very popular in that sense. So yes, but then again, Jamaat for the last few years, I mean, they have been their base, activists and leaders. They have been subjected to extrajudicial executions by the Hasina regime. That is not supported by most of the general populace, I would say.
Right, Sheikh Hasina, you're referring to there, the Prime Minister. Abu Bakr, come back on that. And let's bear in mind, these are not Tasneem's accusations against Jamaat, but ones that are out there in the popular domain, that people, a lot of people in Bangladesh see your party's history as a problem in terms of its current state.
I absolutely disregard what Mr. Tasneem has said.
No, remember, he's not saying that it's his personal opinion. He has given us an overall independent appreciation. I could easily have put those points to you myself from my notes here.
Yeah, that is his perspective. That is his perspective. I do not buy his point. Let me remind him that Jamaat, in all the parliamentary elections, Jamaat has participated. And in no election, in local or national election, that Jamaat did not participate. Jamaat has participated in all participatory elections in Bangladesh. And there was not an issue. Election commissions has sometimes raised the issue to all political parties that you have to change this and that. But it does not mean that election commission has raised an issue with Jamaat that your constitution does not comply with the RPU or is not eligible to be registered. No. If it is the case, if Tasneem Alam is right, election commission could have deregistered Jamaat. They did not. And they did not file a case against Jamaat. And election commission is not a party. They did not file the case against Jamaat Islami. It is an ally of Awami League who moved the petition to the court. So it is a government conspiracy. It is very clear. As I said, it is not me who said that. It is United States Department's report, Human Rights Watch report, International Crisis Group report, who said that government is using judicial system for their own interest against the opposition. And also, you know that the ex-Chief Justice, Mr. Sinha, has been ousted and thrown out of the country because he had given a judgment against the government. So there is a clear proof that government is using the court system. And surprisingly, just 1 month before the election, the court has given the decision. The High Court finally published the verdict, and the Election Commission has formally deregistered. However, the fact of the matter is, Jamaat has appealed against the decision 5 years back. The appeal is still pending with the Supreme Court. And the Election Commission has not shown any respect to the appeal. Appellate Division has accepted the appeal because they considered there are grounds to argue against the High Court decision, which we say it is a politically motivated decision. So we appeal. The case is still pending. When the case is pending, you cannot deregister a political party. It is a disrespect to rule of law. It is a disrespect to justice. It is disrespect to democracy. It is disrespect to constitutional rights of the members of Jamaat Islami.
Okay, I will come back to the current state as we are today in 2018, but I want to go back to 1971. In case the viewers need reminding, Bangladesh used to be East Pakistan. And in 1971, Jamaat-e-Islami is accused of taking part alongside the Pakistani army in operations against Bengali nationalists and pro-liberation intellectuals. Do you deny that?
What I said is that Jamaat has taken a political decision in 1971. The then leadership of Jamaat Islami, they said that there should be a united Pakistan. But it does not mean that political decision is similar to supporting the army, Pakistani army's military campaign on the innocent people of Bangladesh. The Jamaat Islami never supported or took part with the military campaign of Pakistani government. Jamaat has not participated or aided genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes accused of Pakistani army. Not at all. There has not been any independent investigation or independent judicial process that Jamaat Islami leadership or members of Jamaat was accused of.
Okay.
International community, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and a major international organization has said the trial which has been taken place against the Jamaat leaders and Jamaat leadership, by which Jamaat leadership has been hanged, it was not a transparent judicial process. It was a politically motivated process. There was not an independent and fair trial against Jamaat Islami.
Yes, you're completely correct, Abu Bakr. You're right. Those rights groups have condemned that process that's taking place. It's not a process that is in any way backed by the United Nations. So let's come on to the present. Tasneem, is there a wider war, let's call it a war, going on in Bangladesh between those who want to live in a secular society and those who would like Bangladesh redefined along more slightly stricter interpretations of Islam? Is that an issue in the country at the moment? Does Jamaat-e-Islami fit into that battle?
Thank you, Adnan. Very good question. But before that, I must raise this objection to what Mr. Abu Bakr was saying there. There are independent researchers. There are books by even Pakistani diplomats. I can talk about Hussein Haqqani, for example. And people have written books documenting how Jamaat-e-Islami and its student wings were supplying members to a death squad called Al-Badr back in 1971. And I really don't understand how you can take a political decision and support a unified Pakistan when Pakistan army was slaughtering Bengali civilians and it was and raping Bengali women. What kind of politics is that? Having said that, right now I do not see what's happening in present-day Bangladesh as a clash between secular politics and Islamist politics. What happened here is that Sheikh Hasina is engaged in a game of what I say, your Islamist is worse than my Islamist. So Sheikh Hasina is allied with some Islamist parties that are more conservative than Jamaat. Some of them have very questionable medieval ideas about, for example, women's participation in the society. And she is fine with them. She is fine with, getting support from them. Just 2 days back, Hasina had a meeting, a dialogue with, I think, around 10 Islamist parties. And they said they want to see her as the prime minister in the next term also. So it is not necessarily a clash of secularism and Islamism. It's something much darker, I would say, much colder.
Abu Bakr, all is not lost for Jamaat-e-Islami because the Electoral Commission has said that if you make certain modifications, you can be reinstated as a political party. Are there any plans for Jamaat-e-Islami to comply with those requests to then again play a part in political life in Bangladesh?
As I said, that it was not an issue by the Election Commission at all, that Jamaat's constitution does not comply with the Election Commission rules or RPO. Election Commission has not raised the issue. That Jamaat believes in the sovereignty of Allah, God, and some other Islamic political party also believes that. So there is not any issue with other political parties. Why suddenly there is an issue with Jamaat Islami? Because Jamaat is a key opposition political party against the government. That is the main reason. And Jamaat has appealed against the decision of the High Court, and the case is still pending with the Supreme Court. The case has not been decided. So it is if there is an the fair decision from the Supreme Court, Jamaat will get the registration back. And Jamaat wants to get the registration back, and Jamaat believes in democracy. Jamaat wants to take part in the democracy. Jamaat always committed to the democracy. Jamaat took part in major parliamentary and the local elections. And as Mr. Tasneem Alam has said, that the government is fine with their government is very fine with their so-called Islamists, but when you are against the government, then you are not fine. Your constitution does not comply with the Election Commission or the constitution of Bangladesh. So it is nothing but a political conspiracy against Jamaat Islami, because Jamaat is a key political, major political party which is acting against the current regime.
Gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Newsmakers. Whitey Bulger was a feared gangster who died the way he lived, violently. The notorious former mob boss and FBI informant was brutally beaten to death in prison. Multiple assailants, including a hitman for the mafia, they're suspected to have killed him after he was transferred to a prison in West Virginia. His killing has been seen as a message from the criminal fraternity that those who turn on their former colleagues don't live to tell the tale. Haider Abbasi has more on the death and life of Whitey Bulger.
A bloody end to a bloody life. James Whitey Bulger was found dead. The 89-year-old former crime boss was killed in his prison cell in the United States. Until his arrest in 2011, he was one of America's most wanted. He was serving 2 life sentences for the murders of 11 people when he was killed. But Bulger had a secret. He was an informant for the FBI. He was transferred to a West Virginia prison just a day before he was killed. This has led some to suspect his death was organized by a rival gang. The man suspected of murdering Bulger is Freddie Gaius. Gaius is serving a life sentence of his own for killing another former mob boss, Al Bruno. In the 1970s and 1980s, Bulger was the head of the Winter Hill Gang in Boston. But at the time, organized crime was beginning to lose its grip on the United States. Crime families were involved in lucrative businesses like drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. So what caused their decline? Courts had struggled to convict mobsters, in part because they bribed public officials or intimidated witnesses. But all this began to change. In 1970, Congress passed the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. This allowed prosecutors to tackle entire criminal organizations instead of just targeting individual criminals. RICO proved to be one of the most powerful tools in taking down the mafia. By the 21st century, the mafia was a shadow of its former self. But organized crime was able to survive after the 9/11 attacks on New York City, as law enforcement shifted resources to counter terrorism. So how active is the mob today? And is it still a threat to society? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
And to discuss Whitey Bulger's death and the state of the mob today, we're joined by Michael Francis. Michael is in Las Vegas. He was a New York mobster in the 1980s with the notorious Colombo crime family, which at one point was the biggest earner the mob had seen since Al Capone, until he decided to walk away and leave his life of crime. Michael Francis, welcome to the Newsmakers. Why do you think Whitey Bulger was killed?
Well, honestly, I think it was a mistake by the Bureau of Prisons. Normally when you go in and you have a jacket like Whitey's, he was a known informant, highly publicized, you have separations. You're not supposed to be put around anybody that could possibly cause you harm. And sometimes the Bureau of Prisons make mistakes and they put them in the wrong place. They put them in population. And there were some people out there that obviously knew of his reputation. They were from Massachusetts, where he was from. And I really believe it was a mistake because it happened to me when I was in prison. They brought a separation of mind into prison, somebody that was in the witness protection program, and by mistake they put him in general population. And it could have been pretty bad for him too, but he was fortunate he was able to get out of it.
So you think it was a killing by fellow prisoners who didn't like the fact that he was an FBI informant rather than a designated hit instructed from the outside?
Well, the word was out on Whitey that if anybody were to see him, that word was out for the last 20 years. I knew that when I was part of the life. I knew the people from Massachusetts. One of them in particular, Jerry Angiulo, had instructed me. He said, look, if we ever see this guy or find this guy, it's basically shoot to kill on the spot. So everybody knew that. It was no secret. And I believe when they put him in that prison, the guys from Massachusetts knew exactly who he was. And from what I understand, the fellow that admitted to it was an associate of the mob, and, he did his duty.
Why do you think he became an informant for the Bureau?
who knows? I mean, look, when I was in the Colombo family, we had people around us that we thought were loyal, and we learned later on that they were informing with the FBI for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, it was very scary when you find these things out, about somebody that you're standing next to and discussing things and doing things with for so many years. But, who knows? I mean, sometimes they do it for themselves. I believe with Whitey, he wanted to take control of his area, and he didn't like the Italian guys, no doubt about that. And it was a trade-off. He was given information on the Italian mob, and he was allowed to run free pretty much out there. So that's the game that some of these guys play, and unfortunately, it normally ends up bad.
Michael, what did the criminal world used to say about Whitey Bulger? He was found guilty of 11 murders, but when he was out, when he was operating and people were talking about him, was his criminality more notorious than that of others? What was his reputation?
No, I mean, look, as far as my associates, nobody liked him. We didn't have high regard for him at all. He did his thing. He normally didn't interfere with any of us. We don't, he just wasn't well liked, and he wasn't well regarded, and, stay out of our hair and we'll leave you alone. But obviously he crossed the line in many ways.
Let's look at the mob as it is today. How much has organized crime changed since you were involved, since Whitey Bulger was involved? Is it the same as it was before?
I always say the golden years of the mob in the United States was really from, the 50s right through to the mid-80s. And during that time, we had a tremendous amount of control. I mean, we controlled the unions. And in America, if you control the major unions, in a way, you control the country. And we had a tremendous amount of power there with the Teamsters and, the dock workers and security unions. I mean, I controlled a security union that had guards around nuclear power plants. So we had a tremendous amount of control then. And, we had infiltrated, really American society from the White House right down to the man on the street with the numbers business and everything in between. So we had a tremendous amount of control. That really started to end in the mid-80s. When I have to give Rudy Giuliani credit for this, because he started using the RICO Act very effectively. It was a very difficult law for us to defend, and a lot of us got caught off guard with it. And it really started to end for us in the mid-80s. That's when they put all the bosses away. That's when I went away. A lot of my fellow associates, fell under that RICO. And a lot of guys started becoming informants because, years ago, prior to that, if you got a 10-year sentence, 15-year sentence, really no big deal. You do some time, you get parole later on, you come out and you resume business. But when RICO came, it was a whole different thing. They were giving guys 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. Guys don't stand up under that kind of time. And it really started to create a lot of informants. The FBI started to win. And, it won't go away in my lifetime. I mean, it's still operating, certainly in New York. The five families still do exist, but they don't have the same power base as they did once before. But I always say these guys are very resourceful. They're not going to go away in my lifetime. It'll continue on.
And do you think organized crime influences American politics?
Oh, I know for a fact it did. I mean,
I
had
now.
many
Does
connections.
Does it do it now, Michael?
Now? Not as much today. No, I mean, it's different. But look, there's a certain way that the Italian mob, La Cosa Nostra in our country operates that we just got a way around about us, and people want to be around us, and that goes for politicians also. We supported a lot of them with major fundraisers, a lot of money. We had union money behind them. And as long as those opportunities exist, we'll have influence in politics. And, I get asked about Donald Trump all the time. Donald Trump was a major builder, obviously, in New York. And back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, you couldn't build in New York unless you dealt with the unions. I don't care who you were. So he had to deal with us at times. There was no question about that. But that doesn't mean that he was a close associate. We didn't control Donald Trump or anything like that. And I can say that for a fact. I met him on 2 or 3 occasions with Roy Cohen, very famous attorney back then. So obviously he dealt with us, but we didn't control him. But that's not true of all politicians. There were many that we did control.
So you live a very different life now. How did you get out of the system? How easy was it to get out?
You know, it wasn't easy at all. I mean, you don't walk away from that life, you know, without entering a witness protection program or going into hiding. But, you know, I was very fortunate. I mean, I knew that life very well. You got to understand, I was a cop regime or a captain, so I understood the life on a high level. And, you know, I moved away from the guys. You know, I changed my entire lifestyle. I had 7 or 8 years of a pretty rough time. Plus, in prison, they kept me locked down quite a bit. So it was a rough struggle for about 10 to 12 years for me. But honestly, without getting into detail, I just outlasted everybody. I mean, everybody I know, and I mean everybody, is either dead or in prison for the rest of their lives. So, you know, I was very fortunate. You know, I was able to make the break. And, you know, I don't take anything for granted. You know, I'm careful when I go to certain places because I know it should be. But so far, it's worked out. And, you know, it's been 20 years for me now. So, you know, I think I have a good run on the outside.
Just briefly and finally, Michael, you say that the word was out on Whitey Bulger for 20 years, so he would have been looking over his shoulder every minute of every day, presumably. Is that what it's like for you?
No, and let me tell you, with Whitey, you know, we lived in the same neighborhood in Santa Monica. We walked the same streets that he eventually got arrested on. And I probably bumped into him because that's where I lived, but I didn't recognize him at the time, and I wasn't looking. You know, maybe if I was looking, I might have recognized him. But then we lived there for probably 10 years together. We shared the same neighborhood. But you know, no, it's not the same for me. I mean, I don't look over my shoulder. I don't think anybody's out there actively looking for me. I mean, I'm a public speaker. They can find me. It's not that difficult. But you know, again, you know, I don't take it for granted. With me, you know, I believe it's like anybody else. You know, if somebody wants to make a name for themselves and they're at an event that I'm at, or they see me walking the street, they make a phone call, you know, back to New York, and who knows what could happen. But I don't worry about it because you can't live your life like that. You know, I don't thumb my nose in anybody's face, but I certainly don't live in fear.
Michael, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Appreciate it. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Do check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye.